Good afternoon. I'm Chris Baker with syracuse.com and the Post-Standard. I'm here today with U.S. Representative John Katko. John, welcome.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone out there, and thanks for watching.
John is running for re-election in the 24th Congressional District. He is running against Democrat Dana Balter, and the election is November 6th. We're just under 3 weeks out. We're going to be sitting down with John today and asking some questions that have been submitted by readers, as well as some that have been submitted by people on Facebook and in our comments. So if you have a question as we go and you'd like to ask it, please put it in the comments on Facebook. We're going to do our best to get to as many as we can. We've got a lot of questions for this Q&A, so we're gonna dig right in and, like I said, get to as many as we can.
Let's go.
This is probably the thing we heard most about was the federal deficit, and a report came out yesterday that said the federal deficit has jumped 17%. We got a lot of different variations on questions about this, but Mitch McConnell yesterday blamed that increase on things like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and said we need to adjust those programs to shore up that deficit. The deficit's also been driven by a loss in revenue from the tax cuts that you voted for last year. Do you support making cuts or changes to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security in order to make up for the increase in the deficit?
No, and I'll tell you, and my opponent has routinely tried to make that an issue in this campaign, and it really is kind of a scare tactic, because I have never once said that I would support a Medicare or Social Security cuts to pay for anything. And just quickly about the debt, keep in mind that in the previous administration, the previous 8 years, the debt increased more than all other times and all other presidents that came before President Obama combined. So it went up exponentially higher. And what we've done since I've been in Congress, the 4 years I've been here, is we're now at discretionary spending, which is everything except the non-governmental programs. Discretionary spending is at 2011 funding levels. So we've held the lid on spending quite well, but there is structurally, as we all know, Social Security and Medicare are eating a bigger and bigger slice of the pie and going forward. So do we have to do something about it at some point? Perhaps, but I would absolutely positively not go for any cuts to anyone who has paid into the system in any way, shape, or form. If we have people that are coming into the system, like young kids that have a whole lifetime to plan, and we make adjustments to make it solvent long-term overall, I'd be all for that, talking about that. But for anyone like myself or anyone else, you or anyone out there that's listening that's been working and paying into the system, I don't think you can move the goalposts in the middle of the game. And we got plenty of time for Social Security. It's solvent until 2032, and Medicare's solvent until 2026. And what the growth of the economy lately has allowed since the tax cuts, has given a little bit more cushion to Social Security and Medicare going forward. So I'm excited about that. But one thing's for sure, if we go to a Medicare for all system, like my opponent is advocating for, you're going to have everyone's taxes in this country double just to pay for them. And a report came out and showed that even if you double the taxes, it's highly unlikely that Medicare in its current form would be able to be sustained. The amount of cuts to hospitals, the amount of cuts to doctors' pay would cripple a lot of hospitals and a lot of the healthcare system, and it would really dramatically change Medicare as we know it now. Don't forget, people that are in Medicare now have paid it their whole lives, and now are enjoying the fruits of it that they're retired. And we're talking giving it to everybody, and it's going to cost an extraordinary amount of money, and I think it would bankrupt the country.
Well, let's stick with the deficit for a moment. So if we aren't looking at cuts to any of these programs, how do we make up for the loss in revenue? I think it was a 30% drop in corporate tax revenue over the last year. So how do we make up for that increasing deficit? I mean, it's somewhat unusual to see an increasing deficit during an economy that is going as well as
this one. But overall, the deficit that's projected from the tax cuts is over a 10-year period. And that is under the worst case scenario of a low growth economy. We are growing at a much higher rate than that already. And projections are, I think, for the next quarter is going to be close to 4% again, which is way above, I believe it's a 2.9% growth rate is what that deficit is projected upon. If we keep growing at a better rate than that projection, we will definitely not have as much of a hit to the bottom line of the debt for the next 10 years. And don't forget, that is it's a significant portion, but in the long run, it's nowhere near what we encountered over the last 8 years, and it's nowhere near as catastrophic. Now, anyone will tell you the way to really attack a deficit is to grow the economy. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with tax reform, and that's exactly what we're trying to do with regulatory reform, and what we're trying to do with tariffs. So those three things have really structurally made our economy, long-term growth perspective, much better. Because what was happening the previous 10 years, we're going at 1 or 2% growth rate. And we're talking about at least doubling that, or getting close to doubling that moving forward. And that is going to help grow the economy, and that's really important.
So the leader of your party yesterday did suggest cuts to these programs, though. Mitch McConnell.
Not my leader. He's in the Senate.
Right. Sorry, you're right. But it is still a possibility that this could be on the table in your next term. So what would you do to protect those things? You said that you don't support making cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Yeah. So what are you specifically going to do to protect those?
Well, I'm going to do what I've done throughout my time in Congress. I'm going to act in an independent manner and do what's right for my constituents first, not my party. I routinely have voted against my party on huge, crucial, big votes like the Affordable Care Act repeal. I voted against it. And the Farm Bill, which happens once every 5 years, I voted against it twice because it contained, once I'm sorry, another one's coming, because it contains SNAP benefit cuts. So to me, it's a no-brainer. It's easy for me. If they contain cuts to people that are currently in the system, I'm not going to vote for it. I'm just not going to do it.
All right. Let's move on. Probably the topic we got the second most number of questions on was an ad that your campaign has been running against Dana Balter, specifically pointing to her time in Florida and an outstanding tax bill she had while she was down there. We had a couple people say that they are questioning your sincerity in this ad, and a lot of people have pointed to the fact that your opponent satisfied that tax bill. Knowing that and seeing there was a fact check that we ran, and I think the Auburn newspaper ran, why do you still continue to run that ad?
Because it's accurate. Listen, we're less than 3 weeks out to the election, and we know virtually nothing about my opponent's background. We really don't even know where she's lived, and she's running commercials at this very time, saying she moved to Syracuse in 2003. Well, she doesn't tell anyone what we know just because we stumbled across this tax lien. The tax lien itself was for a couple $1,000s. She negotiated it down and paid it and satisfied it. We're not. The point is twofold. Number one is she wants to double our taxes, and in fact, there's many other taxes we can talk about that she wants to put on our society. But literally doubling every single person, every single business's tax is something she wants to do. So it seems kind of hypocritical that she had a tax lien for not paying a bill, and while she wants to hammer us on taxes. But more importantly, she told everybody she moved to Syracuse in 2003, and then we get this, we find out she was living in Florida and she was running a business. And then we probe further, we asked, the reporters probe further, and she explains many different stories about it. Number one is she went to Florida in 2010 to oversee her nephew who was in high school and is going to an elite golf school. And then she tells later at a forum I was at that she was there because she was recovering from a debilitating injury and she needed constant care. And then we find out that before Florida, she was in Pennsylvania for 3 years. So during at least 5 years or so, when she claimed she was in Syracuse, she was actually not here. And it was frustrating for us because no one was reporting it, no one was getting that story out, so we had to go through with it. But I think about it. We don't even know what her work history is. And we're 3 weeks out from the election. She refused to answer such basic questions as who she voted for in the primary. She was here yesterday, I believe, with you all, and she would not even tell you who she voted for. Was it Cuomo or Cynthia Nixon? She won't tell you who she voted for Speaker. And I think that's it's kind of a pattern of we just don't know anything about her. And I think the voters need to know some of the things. I mean, listen, even the picture that was shown on the commercial was from the listing in that very apartment that was for sale that she stayed in recently and sold for close to $1 million. So that's all stuff we don't know about her, and she's not answering questions on any of that background, really.
I believe the picture was, and I don't believe me, you want to get too much in the weeds on this, but the picture was of the pool of the apartment complex.
Well, it was listed on the listing as it not being a condo, so we took that from the listing. The actual listing for the actual unit, was listed. That was her address on the tax lien that said Dana Balter Design, some business that she had down there. So that's how we got that, and that's how we used that in the commercial. So, okay. I mean, listen, would we prefer to be talking about other things? Sure, but we don't even know her background, so we have to at least try and show while she's running an ad right now, saying that she's been here since 2003, but know that she hasn't. And I think that's something that the voters need to listen to.
So do you think? I mean, is there a concern for you? I spoke with her yesterday. Her explanation was 2003 to 07, and I might be getting these years a little bit wrong, but lived here, went to Florida, and then came back, and has been here a total of maybe 10 years. Now, you used her title, visiting assistant professor, pretty often in campaigns to kind of, I think, sow a narrative that is, she's not from here necessarily. Do you think someone needs to be from here? Or do you think there's an amount of time someone needs to be here or live here in order to properly?
No, I think the bigger narrative is that it's pretty obvious that she's not from here because, first of all, that's her title. Her assistant visiting teaching professor is her actual title, right? That is her title. And we also know that she came up from Connecticut. She did not grow up here, and then she left here, and then she was living in Florida and Pennsylvania, wherever, and then she came back. But it's obvious, and I think it is important to know whether someone's from here or not, because you understand the people better if you grew up here, like I have. I mean, I loaded trucks at PNC Warehouse, and that impacted me about my decision to cut taxes for everybody and try and give them a tax break, and to try and understand the economic malaise that has beset this area for a long time. And instead of having that mindset of want to help people, she just wants to come in and raise everyone's taxes because she thinks that the government's best and she's got the best ideas for that. And I think that is absolutely relevant for part of the discussion here, for sure.
All right. Well, we'll move on to some more policy-based things here. Just a reminder, we are here with John Katko, congressman from Central New York, who is running for re-election to his third term. Mr. Katko is taking questions. John is taking questions.
John's good enough for me.
I've heard you say that many times. Taking questions from readers. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, please put it in the comments on Facebook, and we will get to as many as we can. So let's move on. I got two different questions. This one comes from Kelly Humphrey in Manlius, who wants to ask about the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. The act essentially makes a concealed carry permit in another state valid in all other states.
And that's all it does.
Correct?
Yes, that's right.
Her concern is, she says, this allows people with gun licenses in states that have more lax gun regulations than New York to carry weapons here. Why do you support this bill, and how does it protect the people of New York?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to make sure you understand, everyone understands. I spent the vast majority of my adult life working on violent crime cases and gun cases, and often at great personal risk to myself and my family. Twice I've had to move my family, once temporarily and once permanently, out of Puerto Rico because of the threats I was under. But I became a very innovative and very aggressive prosecutor against guns, and I believe that we have to endeavor to keep all guns out of hands of people who shouldn't have them. Absolutely, and I've spent a lifetime doing that, at least my adult career doing that. So I have an awful lot of background on this. All the concealed carry reciprocity means is that if you are a valid gun owner, licensed gun owner in one state, and you're traveling to another state, you can carry that gun in that other state under your concealed carry permit. That's all it means, nothing else. You are still subject to the laws of where you are, and if the laws are more restrictive where you are, you have to abide by those laws. That's period. And that's pretty simple. That's the only reason I did that.
But I think it was the district attorney had some issues with this. Is there any concern that undermines the these strict laws that we do have, or the strict concealed carry regulation, how hard it is to get a concealed permit?
How hard it is? The vast majority of the states have a training regimen for them and a very robust screening. So I don't think that's a significant issue. And you don't hear a lot about individuals with concealed carry permits committing crimes. They're lawful gun owners that are simply traveling across, maybe to visit a family member, maybe to go hunting or whatever. And that's really the only reason I did it. I think it's been blown way out of proportion. But I understand her concern, and I understand others' concern, but make no mistake about it, they're subject to the laws of the states they're in all the way through. So our laws are more restrictive. They have to abide by those.
All right. Let's talk a little bit more about gun violence in particular, which has been a huge problem, especially this summer, but for years in Syracuse. We got a couple questions on this, but what will you do in your next term? What can you promise you can do to help Syracuse combat gun violence?
Yeah, well, we've already done an awful lot, and I will continue to do that. And don't forget, in 2011, I did a very groundbreaking gun trafficking case where we disrupted a network that was bringing guns from Georgia up to Syracuse. They were buying guns like $99 a pop down gun stores in Georgia and smuggling them up here. And we charged several individuals in that gun trafficking scheme, and they had 74 guns were part of that scheme. That spawned the gang violence task force, which I spearheaded, and we did 6 or 7 major gang cases. And so there's a lot we've done. The grant programs to help support the police departments are robustly funded, and they've been increased this year. Getting the physical tools that they need and the equipment they need, which is always something we supply in the federal level. Making sure we have robust enforcement of gun laws here. I've been advocating for reinvigorating the gang task force with federal prosecutions. When I did those, the bad guys who were involved in the gun violence here were terrified of us. And that was a good thing. The cops felt like they had an upper hand on the street. I'm hearing lately that there's more intimidation going on, and there's more, the violence is getting more bold.
You mean witness intimidation? Or?
Witness intimidation as well. The violence is much more bold. And so reinvigorating the gang task force is a top priority, but I also think you need to get into the community. And as a matter of fact, I'm having a meeting next week, ironically, with several people are prosecuted that have served substantial jail sentences, and we're sitting down together. They're out, they're doing good after serving a substantial amount of time, and they reached out to me, and they want to do something about it. And so we're going to meet and we're going to talk about how we can help these kids on the street. But so those are things we're going to do up front. What do you do on the back end? The back end is really what you have to do, and you have to intervene with these kids at an earlier age. I did like prosecuted 170 of these cases, and what some of the common threads were: single parent home, often a young mother, almost always extreme poverty, almost always, and a lot of lack of nurturing, a lack of support at home. So when these kids got to school, they're often food deficient, and they weren't getting proper support at home. So I've properly funded and advocate for increased funding for early Head Start, summer feeding programs, weekend feeding programs for schools through grants from the federal government, early intervention on literacy. All those types of things I think are going to be really important to stem the generational violence that we're seeing now. If a kid is falling behind by 3rd grade, his chances of ever catching up are very, very slim. So you got to get them early. You got to intervene early. That's why I'm at the Boys and Girls Club and all those places. If they're behind by 3rd grade, the scale starts sliding down by 8th or 9th grade. They're done. They're out by 10th at the latest, and they're in the gang replaces the family unit. Before you know it, they're in way over their heads committing extraordinarily violent crimes. So intervening early is going to be a critical component of that.
All right. Let's move on. This, let me make sure I've got it here. This comes from Martha Viglietta in Pompey. So last week's IPCC report underlined the urgency regarding climate change. Mm-hmm. Said you've shown willingness to act by signing the House Climate Resolution. Mm-hmm. What specific action will you take in your next term to decrease CO2 emissions and combat climate change?
Well, I've already done it to some extent, but do we need to do more? Absolutely, and I'm absolutely open to suggestions. But one thing I've done is I've routinely supported switching funding from fossil-based fuels research to renewable research. So I've definitely supported that. I've definitely supported more strict requirements for new plants, new fossil fuel plants that are being opened, that they have much stricter carbon emission standards. I've been an incredibly strong proponent of nuclear energy, and because of my advocacy, I think that 4 nuclear power plants are going to be solvent for the foreseeable future. And what does that mean? That's 100% carbon-free emissions, and that's really a big thing. We're nowhere near the point where renewables can stand on their own. So having carbon-free emissions like nuclear power plants is big. Hydroelectric power, I'm also very supportive of, and we're going to continue to support all those programs going forward.
All right. So this one comes from Chris McDermott. Just a reminder, about 20 minutes in, we are here with...
Already?
Yeah, right? Goes fast. We're here with John Katko, who is running for re-election in the 24th Congressional District, taking your questions online. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please add it in Facebook. We've gotten lots of questions, so we're going to get to as many as we can. Pressing on, this one comes from Kristen McDermott in Liverpool. She said, considering the way that Donald Trump has conducted himself in the 2 years since the election, are you proud that he is our president and the face of the Republican Party?
Look, my opinion is this, with President Trump is the same as it is with President Obama or whoever is in office. That my job is to do everything I can to support and make them as successful as possible. Do I agree with him all the time? Absolutely not. Do I make it known that I don't agree with him? Absolutely. I mean, there's there's chapter and verse where I've disagreed with him. We can talk about that in a moment. But the overarching point is, I call balls and strikes. Okay. When I disagreed with President Obama, I said it. And when I agreed with him, I said it. I don't care if he's a Republican or a Democrat. I care that he's our president. And I feel the same way about Trump. Does he do a lot of things that are head scratchers and say a lot of things he shouldn't? Yes. Do I wish we put him in permanent Twitter timeout? Absolutely. But I support him when he should be supported, and I call him out when I don't. I'll give you one quick example. It's just an example. When he went overseas and sat with Putin and said that he didn't believe the American intelligence community about Russian interference in the election, I issued a blistering statement on that, saying that. So as he does things, I am called out on him. And Lord knows, you guys ask me a lot about what do you think about what he tweeted lately, or what he said, or what he did, and I tell you how I feel. And I think that's all I can ask for in a representative. Am I going to have a blind allegiance to him? Absolutely not. Am I going to have blind hatred of him and blind opposition? No, that's my opponent, and that's not healthy. I think you have to call balls and strikes, and no matter who's in the White House, you want to do everything you can to make them successful for the good of the country, and that's what I'm trying to do.
She had a follow-up. Do you generally think, if we've got a 50-50 standard, do you generally think he's done a good job or a bad job as president?
I think, I don't want to give him a grade, but I would tell you this. Our economy is going at a pace it hasn't seen in an awfully long time, and that's because of what we've done in the House and Senate and what he's signed into law. But from the bedside manner side, he's got a lot of work to do. So I think it's a mixed bag.
All right. Let's see. This one is from, make sure I've got it down here right, Delilah Cassidy. She says,
cool name.
Yeah, it's a Grateful Dead name, it sounds like.
That's it, Delilah. That's right.
I saw you recently met with women at the Vera House to highlight your effort to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. Can you explain what this bill does and why you support it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just think of the title, Violence Against Women's Act. I mean, why would there be any issue with respect to this at all? And so I've been a staunch supporter of it, and I've led the charge. Myself and Elise Stefanik, the congresswoman just to the north, who's a dear friend of mine, led the charge in the House to have a long-term reauthorization. We're still working on that, but we made sure it didn't lapse in the interim. It was supposed to lapse September 30th. And we made sure that it didn't lapse. And the reauthorization fight's gonna come when we get back to Congress after the election. And I'm confident we'll get a long-term fix, long-term reauthorization. And why is that important? Vera House and places like that rely so much on that money, the grant money and the grant opportunities that come from that, and some of the legal protections for women, women that are subject to abuse, are very, very important. And it's a no-brainer for me to want to support that. Plus, I have an immense amount of respect for Randy Bregman and the other folks at Vera House. They are doing God's work on a very difficult issue. But I can see my own two eyes because I'm over there quite a bit, and I'm constantly interacting with Randy and our staff. They need the grant money that gives them. That helps women in need and men in need. It helps them, right? And why wouldn't we want to support that? It just, to me, it's a no-brainer, and we'll get it done.
All right. Brent from Oswego wants to talk about the border wall in Texas.
Sure.
How committed are you to finishing the construction of the wall, which President Trump promised in his campaign?
Very. I'm very committed to that, and I'm very committed to having a revamped immigration system. And I led the charge with about 10 of my colleagues on the Republican side to have what I think was a comprehensive immigration reform. It fell short for political reasons, which I'll describe, but it's not dead. And I think we're going to revive it when we get back. Not I think, I know I'm going to have efforts to revive it. So in the end, here's what happened. We got together about 10 or 12 Republicans, and we worked over 5 weeks, night and day in Washington. It was exhausting. And we came up with this ultimate compromise, I thought. Provide $25 billion of funding for border security. That's $5 billion a year over 5 years. Pre-appropriated, so it's there. And it would put up physical barriers where you need it, electronic barriers where you don't, and beefed up Border Patrol, revamped the asylum claim system, because only about 7% of people that claim asylum actually are granted asylum, so that it's being abused, and about 12,000% increase over the last few years in asylum claims. So we revamped all that. On the other hand, the biggest issue for Democrats last term, this term, was the DACA kids. 1.8 million kids who were brought here through no fault of their own illegally, but they were kids. So it immediately would have given them status. So think about that. They would have gotten everything they wanted, status. And at the end of the 5-year period, if all the money that's pre-appropriated is spent, then they would start on a path to citizenship. And it also revised the immigration system to make it more merit-based and need-based instead of just a random lottery system. And so I think it was a win-win for everybody. And the third thing it did was stop the practice. It was only a short-term practice, but stop the practice by law, even though it's stopped in fact now, of separating kids at the border. There's only a couple thousand kids that did it. There was 2,000 too many, and the law stopped that as well. So to make a long story short, it fell short. We had a majority of Republicans vote for it, but not an overwhelming majority. And not a single Democrat voted for it because they didn't want to give us or the president a win. And that's reprehensible in my mind because they turned it back on those DACA kids. So we're going to revise it, and we're going to revive it, and we're going to do that. And there's another companion bill that we're going to do that revises the temporary guest worker program to help our dairy farmers and seasonal labor help here, which we need to do badly.
Well, let's go back to, you just mentioned kind of the split between Republicans and Democrats in Washington, and I think that's something you've seen nationally as we are probably farther apart than, or at least it feels like we're farther apart than we typically have been. At least in Washington, you talk a lot about being an independent. So beyond just voting sometimes across the aisle, what can you do to bridge that gap, or what do you plan to do to make it so that it isn't just us versus them, it is all of us in the same.
I'm really glad you asked that because my opponent keeps saying I vote with Donald Trump 90% of the time, so therefore, I'm a partisan. Well, the Georgetown University did an in-depth study and found that out of 100 senators and 435 congressmen and women, I'm the 7th most bipartisan independent member in all of Congress. And you did an analysis here that showed that out of the 26 congressmen and women in Syracuse, you being Syracuse Papers, I was the #1 most likely to break with my party to do what's right for my constituents. So I'm walking the walk and talking the talk, and talking the talk and walking the walk. And I'm going to continue to do that. I'm also a member of what's called the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. There's 24 on either side. And we're committed to finding bipartisan solutions because we all know that the far left and the far right have a stranglehold on this Congress. And that's how it is right now. And so we're working in the middle. And we've got a proposal on infrastructure. We've got a proposal for health care that we've pushed through. I authored the infrastructure proposal. And we got a proposal to restructure the House rules that will make the speaker less vulnerable to the extreme elements of the party and allow them to work more comfortably with the other side, which doesn't happen now because let's say you're a far right winger and you say to Mr. Paul Ryan, if you do that, I'm going to move to vacate the chair and we'll have a vote on whether you should stay speaker. We want to fix those rules, and we're not going to support anybody that doesn't agree to those rules changes for speaker on either side. So we're doing an awful lot, and I do have to note though, my opponent started the Solidarity Movement here in Syracuse. The Solidarity Movement is basically a local chapter of the Indivisible Movement. And the Indivisible Movement is 100% resist everything on the other side through obstruction, through harassment. I've experienced it myself. They've had letter writing parties sending nasty stuff to my house. That's pretty scary and pretty troubling. They've protested Lockheed Martin and called them baby killers. They've protested outside my office for a couple of years. They want to resist everything. And she's at the forefront of that. And she's actually one of the founding members, and she lists that as one of her qualifications. So what does that tell you? She's not going to go to Congress and be that independent, bipartisan voice we need. This district needs that, and Congress needs more people like me and less like her, because if you're just going to resist and fight, nothing's going to get done. And she's showing no inclination that she's going to be able to reach across the aisle and work with the other side.
But I think you mentioned the far right and the far left having a stranglehold on each party. A lot of the tactics of this indivisible movement were taken from the Tea Party,
exactly.
Which came however many years
You're exactly
ago.
right.
So I mean,
exactly right.
It's not I think it's not a problem necessarily unique. It's kind of this pendulum that's swung.
Well, that's exactly my point. The Tea Party has not been a great thing for Congress, and the Democrats are having their Tea Party moment now, and I think she's neck deep in that, and I think that should be a concern for the voters. I mean, not only do we not know her background, people should know that she's a very proud founding member, and she refuses to even step away from the group. We challenged her to do that this week, and she just ignored it. She won't do it. and I think that's telling.
Well, let's take a couple more. We're running a little short on time here. We're here with John Katko,
Keep going.
who is running for. It's getting a little toasty in this room we're in. I hope.
It is a bit like a fishbowl here, isn't it?
It's a little warm in here.
Yeah.
So we'll get to a few more. You've talked a lot about your opponent not saying who she would support for Speaker of the House. Who would you support for Speaker of the House?
Well, the only person running right now is Kevin McCarthy, and I would support him, providing he agrees to the rules changes that we put up. If he doesn't, I won't, and he knows that. And so I've been working with him, and I think we got him to a place where we're going to be able to make that happen. And I think he wants them, because I do think that he's going to want to work with the other side. Whoever gets Speaker, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, I'll work with anybody. But we're going to have a thin majority on either side, whoever gets it. So it's going to be more incumbent than ever to get those rules changes I discussed, and also to get gets a speaker that's going to show that have the guts and the willingness to work with the other side. And one of my concerns about that is my opponent won't tell us who she's voting for speaker. The only one we know on the Democrat side who's running for speaker is Nancy Pelosi, and I just saw her filings. My staff went through them, and she received about $500,000 from donors in San Francisco area, which is Nancy Pelosi's district. And she got over $500,000 from them, and she refused to answer who she'd vote for speaker. But the only candidate right now is her, and having her as speaker would be highly divisive. That's for sure.
But you just said you would be willing to work with whoever the speaker is.
If she ends up being the speaker, I'll do everything I can to make her successful for the good of the country. But I can tell you from her track record, she will be very divisive.
All right, let's take one more policy question here from Denise Androvetti maybe. She's a retiree who said she's expecting to see her health care costs go up this year, and she's concerned about cuts to Medicare. So we briefly touched on this when we talked about the deficit.
What's her name again? I'm sorry?
Denise Androvetti, or Androvetti, something along those lines. But her question is, she wants to know, what is your plan to address increasing medical costs and making healthcare more affordable for people in the 24th?
Sure. Thanks, Denise, for your question. And let me assure you, I've already said it, but I want to make sure you understand. We are not cutting anything with Medicare or Social Security. It's just not going to happen. There's no proposal to do that, and there's no movement to do that, and I won't support it. Do some people talk about it? Yeah. Well, people talk about a lot of things, but that doesn't mean we're going to do it. My opponent has done spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to scare people, and to think that's going to happen. That's not going to happen. We're not going to do it. But as far as healthcare overall goes, we do need to fix things with healthcare, right? I was at Blue Cross Blue Shield last week. Healthcare costs, and they have about 70-some-odd% of the market, their healthcare costs increased 3% this year. That's not a gigantic increase. It's an increase, but not a gigantic one. So should people be concerned long-term? Of course. And what can we do? We've got to do the hard stuff. We've got to have interstate competition for healthcare. We've got to have prescription drug price reform. We've got to have tort reform. Doctors got to stop practicing defensive medicine. And they do a lot more tests and they have a lot more expenses because they're afraid of getting sued. We got to do some reforms in that regard. We got to have high risk pools. 90% of the costs of health insurance are borne by 10% of the people. 90%. So if those people went into a high risk pool and then that thing is properly funded with revenue from the Affordable Care Act, I think you could really help drive down those costs, but also take the individuals that are not a high risk, they go out on the open market, they'd have much more attractive rates available to them as well. So I think those are the kinds of things we need to do. And we also have done some structural things that are going to be really important going forward. We've spent several $1 billion in plussing up spending to the National Institutes of Health to find long-term cures for cancer, like ovarian cancer, breast cancer, but also long-term cures for probably the biggest thing that could bankrupt this country, and that's Alzheimer's. And I know it firsthand because my dad has Alzheimer's, and he's in the end stages of it, and it's a tremendous cost to society. If they can find a cure for Alzheimer's, for example, you would save the government tens of trillions of dollars over the next decade or two. And based on the money we've given them so far, there is hope on the horizon that over the next 3 to 5 years, we may have a major breakthrough. And if you have cures for things like that, that would dramatically change the healthcare cost landscape going forward. So we're doing things structurally, but also long-term.
You mentioned the Affordable Care Act. Mm-hmm. I want to give you a chance to respond to something your opponent said yesterday, that you did not vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which when the vote came up last year. But she said that your vote for the tax bill was effectively a backdoor to repeal the Affordable Care Act by cutting things out.
It's not true, because she's talking about the individual mandate, and that's just another scare tactic. And think what she's done, the house of cards she's built here. she's saying, I voted, I didn't vote for the Affordable Care Act. I kept my word, as I said I was going to, and I didn't do that. But she says, basically, I did it anyways because of the tax reform. The tax reform is helping this economy. Our unemployment's at 4.2% here. But then as far as the impact on health insurance, the individual mandate was repealed last year as part of the tax reform. And I said before I ran for Congress, I didn't agree with the individual mandate, but I would never vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act unless the replacement was ready. I've kept my word on both of those. The individual mandate was factored into the insurance rates this year. Blue Cross Blue Shield, 3% increase, with knowing the individual mandate wasn't there. So it's not having the catastrophic effect because the lack of individuals getting on the health insurance at a younger age, which individual mandate targeted, was already factored in. So that's not going to have the long-term effect, and we're absolutely positively not going to cut Social Security and Medicare, like I said.
All right. We'll close on a question that I asked your opponent yesterday, but what's one place where you two agree, one thing that you think you have common ground on?
Infrastructure, for sure. We both agree that infrastructure is sorely lacking here, and we got to do something about it. And as part of the Problem Solvers Caucus, myself and Elizabeth Esty, a Democrat from Vermont who's retiring this year, drafted a comprehensive infrastructure plan that's on our website, I think, so people can access it. So infrastructure for sure.
All right. Well, very good. We'll leave things there. John Katko was joining us today to answer your questions. John is running for Congress in the 24th District as a Republican. Election day is November 6th. Make sure you get out there and vote. John, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for listening, participating in this high-end, high-tech democracy. Thank you very much.